The auditorium was buzzing with applause. Rows of proud families craned their necks, smartphones raised high, capturing the moment their loved ones crossed the stage. Bright spotlights swept across the sea of caps and gowns. At the very back of the hall, almost hidden in the shadows, a woman in a faded brown coat stood on tiptoe. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, a few stubborn strands escaping to frame her tired face. She clutched a small paper bag in her hands, not because she had anything to eat, but because it gave her something to hold on to, something to keep her from trembling. Her eyes never left the young woman on stage. Lily Moore, valedictorian of New Harbor University. The dean handed Lily her diploma, and the crowd erupted again. But Lily didn't smile right away. She scanned the audience, searching for one face, that face. And when she found it, her lips curved into a smile so radiant it seemed to silence the noise for a heartbeat. From the shadows, Clara Moore's eyes glistened. No one in this room knew how much this moment had cost her. No one knew the years of cold mornings and sleepless nights, of aching hands and bruised knees, of bags so heavy her shoulders felt like they might snap. No one knew she had built this day out of scraps. Literally. It hadn't always been this bright. Clara's life for the past 18 years had been a patchwork of survival. She lived in the East Dock District, a place tourists avoided and maps politely ignored. The air there always carried a trace of salt from the ocean, mixed with the metallic tang of rusting ship hulls. At dawn, while the rest of the city was still wrapped in sleep, Clara would be out on the streets pushing an old cart she'd salvaged from a junkyard. It squeaked with every turn of the wheel, a sound she had grown so used to she barely noticed anymore. Her job? Collecting recyclables? Bottles, cans, cardboard, anything she could exchange for a few dollars at the scrap depot. She learned which alleys yielded the best finds, which restaurants left their bins unlocked, and which nights were worth staying out past midnight. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't safe, but it was all she had. And through it all, there was Lily. Lily, with her wide blue eyes that seemed to drink in the world. Lily, who never once complained about wearing the same shoes for 2 years. Lily, who studied at the kitchen table under the flicker of a single light bulb while Clara sorted bottles into piles. Clara never said it out loud, but every step she took, every bruise she ignored, every insult she swallowed, it was all for her daughter. The day had come when Clara wondered if it was enough. That winter had been brutal. The harbor winds cut through her coat like knives, and work was slow. People were holding onto their cans and bottles for their own cash. The little they earned barely covered rent. One evening, Clara came home late, her hands stiff from cold, to find Lily waiting at the table. Her textbooks were closed. Her expression was serious. "Mom," Lily said softly, "maybe I should stop school for a while. Work. Help out." Clara froze. She knew Lily was old enough to mean it. To get a job, to take on hours she should spend in class. She also knew that once a girl in their neighborhood left school, she almost never went back. Clara set the bags down and reached for her daughter's hand. It was warm, small, and filled with a strength that both broke and healed her heart. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You'll finish, whatever it takes." At that moment, she didn't know what whatever it takes would mean, only that she was ready to pay it. And now, standing in the back of that grand hall years later, Clara realized she had. This, the applause, the smile on her daughter's face, the diploma in her hands, was worth every single night she had walked the freezing streets of East Dock. But the story of how they got here, that was not something anyone in this room knew. The East Dock District was not the kind of place that appeared in tourist brochures. By day, its streets smelled faintly of fish and diesel. By night, they carried the sourness of beer spilled from the neighborhood bar and the rot of forgotten trash. Apartment buildings leaned tiredly against one another, their bricks stained with decades of salt air. Clara Moore had lived here for almost 2 decades, ever since she found herself standing alone at the bus station with a baby in her arms, and nowhere else to go. Her apartment was on the third floor of a crumbling tenement. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her upstairs neighbor's television and the soft drip of water from the bathroom tap 3 doors down. The kitchen was barely the size of a walk-in closet, and in winter, the wind snuck in through the cracked window frames, making the single light bulb sway slightly in its socket. But it was home. And for Lily, it was safety. Clara's mornings started long before sunrise. She'd slip quietly out of bed, pulling on a pair of worn work gloves, careful not to wake her daughter. Her cart, a rusted metal frame with 2 mismatched wheels, waited for her in the hallway. She kept a short length of rope tied to the handle so she could drag it behind her when the load grew too heavy to push. The streets were cold and mostly empty at that hour, except for the occasional delivery truck or the sound of a gull crying overhead. Clara's breath puffed into the air in white clouds as she moved from alley to alley, checking the bins she knew best. Behind the seafood market, near the old shipyard, outside the bowling alley that closed at midnight. Some mornings were good. She'd find neat stacks of beer cans, plastic bottles still capped, cardboard boxes that hadn't been soaked through by rain. Other days, she'd come home with barely enough to cover lunch money for Lily. The depot paid by weight, aluminum, was worth the most, glass the least. Clara became an expert at judging a bag's value just by lifting it. She learned to work fast, sorting as she went, because there was always someone else looking for the same scraps. It wasn't just the cold and the weight that made the work hard. It was the way people looked at her, or rather didn't. Most avoided her eyes entirely, as though meeting her gaze might be contagious. Some tossed insults over their shoulders. "Get a real job," one man had muttered once, stepping around her cart like it was diseased. Clara didn't answer. She had learned early that words cost energy, and she needed to save every bit of hers. At home, Lily's mornings began with the sound of the kettle. Clara always tried to be back by the time her daughter woke, the cart parked in its spot in the hallway, her gloves drying near the heater. Breakfast was simple. Toast when they had bread, oatmeal when they didn't. Lily never complained. She'd sit at the small table, hair still messy from sleep, flipping through her textbooks while eating. "You've got a quiz today, right?" Clara would ask, sliding a mug of tea toward her. Lily would nod, eyes still on the page. "Math. Mr. Harris said it's going to be tough. You've studied. You'll be fine." Sometimes Clara wondered how her daughter managed to carry herself with such quiet confidence. Perhaps it was because Lily had grown up knowing nothing came easily, and that made her treasure everything she earned. School was only a few blocks away, but it felt like another world. Clara had been there once for a parent-teacher conference, and the bright hallways with their polished floors and colorful lockers had seemed almost unreal compared to the peeling paint of their apartment building. Lily thrived there. She made friends, joined the debate club, and often stayed late to work on projects. Clara worried about her walking home after dark, but she also knew that every extra hour spent in the library was an hour closer to a future beyond East Dock. Money, however, was always a shadow at their heels. One winter, the rent went up by $20 a month. It might as well have been $200. Clara started working longer hours, sometimes heading out again after dinner to check the restaurant bins just before closing. It was on one of those nights that the accident happened. She had been climbing down from a dumpster behind a grocery store when her foot slipped. The impact sent a sharp pain shooting through her ankle. She bit her lip, stifling a cry, and sat there for a moment, breathing hard. The pain was bad, but what scared her more was the thought of not working. A day off meant a day without income. She got to her feet, testing her weight on the ankle, and kept going. By the time she got home, it had swollen, but she wrapped it in an old towel and said nothing to Lily. Her daughter had an important test the next morning, and Clara refused to let worry distract her. There were small moments too, ones that Clara stored away like treasures. The afternoon Lily brought home her report card with straight A's. Grinning so wide, Clara thought her face might split. The time they found a discarded bookshelf on the curb and carried it home together, laughing every time they nearly dropped it. The night they sat by the window during a thunderstorm, counting. Seconds between lightning and thunder, wrapped in the same blanket. Those moments didn't cost a cent, but they were the currency Clara valued most. Still, the fear was always there. The fear that something would happen. An illness, an eviction notice, a bad month at the depot that would pull everything apart. And then came the night Lily made her quiet suggestion. They had been eating soup, steam curling in the dim light of the kitchen. Clara had just told her they might need to delay paying the gas bill. Lily stirred her bowl slowly before speaking. "Mom, maybe I should take a year off. Work. Help you out." Clara's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. She felt the words. Like a blow. "You think I'm doing all this so you can quit?" Her voice was sharper than she meant it to be. Lily's eyes widened. "No, I don't want you to be so tired all the time." Clara reached across the table, her hand closing over her daughter's. "Listen to me. You are going to finish school. You are going to go further than I ever could. That's not up for discussion." Lily's gaze held hers for a moment, then dropped. She nodded. Clara knew she had hurt her, but she also knew she couldn't let Lily give up her future. Not for her sake. She would find a way. She always did. But finding a way meant sacrifices Clara didn't dare speak of. She began skipping lunch more often, drinking water to keep the hunger at bay. She mended her coat, with scraps of fabric, turning the tears toward the inside so no one would see. She walked farther to reach the better recycling spots, avoiding areas where too many others competed for the same cans. Every dollar saved was another dollar for Lily's school supplies, another exam fee paid, another bus ticket for a debate tournament. Clara told herself it was temporary, just until graduation, just until her daughter had a real chance. What she didn't know was how quickly that chance was approaching, and how much more she would have to endure before they reached it. It started with a letter. Lily had been quiet all week, her eyes carrying a kind of secret brightness that made Clara curious. One evening, she came home from school holding a white envelope, the seal unbroken. "It's from the state academic." "Board," Lily said, placing it carefully on the kitchen table like it was made of glass. "They're announcing the results for the regional scholarship competition." Clara's hands were damp as she picked it up. Her reading glasses rested on the counter, but even without them, she could make out the official crest in the corner. "You open it," Clara said, pushing it back toward her daughter. Lily's fingers trembled slightly as she tore it open. Her eyes scanned the first line, then the next, before a sharp breath escaped her lips. I won, Mom. I got first place." Clara didn't realize she was smiling until her cheeks ached. "First place? They're giving me a full scholarship. For my first year at New Harbor University. Tuition, books, everything." Clara pulled her daughter into her arms. The smell of Lily's hair, faintly of soap and the outside air, pressed into her memory like a stamp. For the first time in years, Clara felt something close to relief. But relief, she had learned, was a fragile thing. The scholarship covered tuition, yes, but it didn't cover the cost of living. Dorm fees, transportation, food, all of it still loomed ahead. Clara began working longer hours, telling herself she could rest once Lily was settled in college. It was during one of these extended shifts, in the early spring, that the storm came. The weather had been strange all day, heavy clouds pressing low over the city, the air thick with the scent of rain. Clara was at the shipyard sorting through a pile of discarded fishing gear when the first drops fell. She kept working, ignoring the wetness soaking through her sleeves. But within minutes, the rain turned violent, hammering the streets with such force that even the gulls fled. Clara pushed her cart under a corrugated metal overhang and waited, shivering. The wind whipped around the corner, cold and sharp. When the rain eased slightly, she decided to make for home. The streets were slick, the puddles deep, but she moved quickly. She was halfway across the intersection near the East Dock Bridge when she heard the horn. A delivery van skidded on the wet pavement, its tires screaming against the asphalt. Clara jumped back instinctively, but her foot caught the edge of the curb, She went down hard. Pain exploded in her left shoulder as she hit the ground. The van swerved, missing her by inches, and the driver's voice shouted something she couldn't hear over the pounding of her pulse. She lay there for a moment, gasping before forcing herself to her feet. Her arm hung stiff at her side, useless. At the clinic, the doctor told her it was a dislocated shoulder. It would heal, but she needed to rest it for weeks. No lifting, no heavy work. Clara laughed, a short, humorless sound. "I can't rest," she said. "If I don't work, we don't eat." The doctor sighed but didn't argue. He knew that tone, the kind that meant the patient had already decided. For the next few days, Clara did her best to hide the injury from Lily. She kept her coat on inside, used her good arm to move things, and insisted she was just a little sore. But Lily wasn't fooled. "Mom," she said one night, standing in the doorway of the kitchen. "What happened to your arm?" Clara tried to wave it off. "It's nothing. You can't even open a jar. That's not nothing." Clara met her daughter's gaze and saw the stubbornness there, the same stubbornness she herself carried. Finally, she sighed. "I fell. It's just a sprain." Lily didn't believe her, but she didn't push. Instead, she started coming home earlier, taking on extra chores, quietly lifting the heavier bags before her mother could reach them. Then came the day of the state debate finals. Lily had been preparing for months. Winning would mean another scholarship, one that covered living expenses. But the competition was on the same day Clara was supposed to make one of her biggest recycling runs, after a neighborhood festival that always left behind mountains of bottles and cans. Clara hesitated. The festival hall could cover a week's worth of groceries. But the look in Lily's eyes when she talked about the debate was something Clara couldn't ignore. So she went to the auditorium instead. It was strange sitting in the polished wooden seats, surrounded by students in crisp blazers and teachers with clipboards. The air smelled faintly of coffee and floor wax. Clara felt out of place, her coat still smelling of rain and metal, but she kept her focus on the stage. Lily stood there, poised and confident, her voice carrying clear and strong. She argued her points with precision, her hands moving subtly. For emphasis, her eyes meeting the judges without flinching. Clara's chest swelled with pride. When they announced the winners, Lily's name came first. The applause was loud, but not as loud as the pounding of Clara's heart. Another scholarship. Another door opening. But the weeks that followed were not easier. Clara's shoulder healed slowly, and she couldn't match her old pace. Bills piled up. The landlord hinted about raising rent again. One night, Clara sat at the kitchen table, long after Lily had gone to bed, staring at the numbers she had scrawled on the back of an envelope. Even with the scholarships, even with all the overtime she could manage, they would barely make it. Her hands clenched into fists. She had promised her daughter she would finish school without working, and she meant to keep that promise. She just didn't know how. The answer came, oddly enough, from Mrs. Ramirez, the old woman who ran the corner grocery. Clara had been a regular there for years, buying bruised fruit at a discount. One afternoon, Mrs. Ramirez waved her over. "You still got that strong back?" the old woman asked. "Strong enough," Clara replied cautiously. "My nephew's starting a recycling program for the neighborhood. Pays better than the depot. Wants someone honest to sort and keep records. You'd be good for it." It wasn't glamorous, but it was steadier, and it meant fewer hours on the streets. Clara took the job. For the first time in a long while, she felt like they might actually make it. The summer before Lily started university, they stood on the pier one evening, watching the sun sink into the water. The air smelled of salt and fried food from a vendor nearby. "You nervous?" Clara asked. "A little," Lily admitted, "but mostly excited. It feels big." "It is big," Clara said. She slipped her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "You've earned it." Lily looked at her, the fading light catching in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." Clara didn't answer. She just held her daughter a little tighter, her heart full with both pride and the quiet fear that came with letting go. She had no idea then just how high Lily was about to soar, or how sweet the victory would taste when it finally came. letter came on a Tuesday morning. Clara was sorting glass bottles in the back of the recycling center when her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. It was a message from Lily. "Results are out. I'm coming home." Clara's fingers went still over the bin. Her pulse quickened. She wiped her hands on her apron, barely noticing the dust streaks left behind, and glanced toward the door as though her daughter might already be walking through it. 20 minutes later, Lily burst into the apartment, hair wind-blown from running. She held a sheet of paper in her hand, the edges crumpled from her grip. "Mom," she said, her voice catching. I made it." Clara blinked. "Made it where?" Lily took a deep breath. "New Harbor University, top of the entrance list." "They called it," she laughed, a breathless, almost disbelieving sound. "They called it valedictorian level." For a heartbeat, Clara didn't move. She just stared at her daughter, taking in the flushed cheeks, the trembling hands, the way her eyes shone. And then she stepped forward, pulling her into an embrace so fierce it almost knocked them both off balance. Tears spilled down Clara's face before she realized they were there. "You did it," she whispered. "Oh, Lily, you did it." The news spread quickly through East Dock. Neighbors who had once barely nodded in the hallway stopped Clara on the street to congratulate her. Mrs. Ramirez from the grocery store slipped a paper bag of fresh apples into her hands for the scholar. Even the gruff landlord muttered something that sounded like "well done" when they passed in the stairwell. For the first time, Clara felt like they weren't invisible. Lily's acceptance came with a full-ride scholarship, tuition, housing, meals, books, everything. It was more than either of them had dared to hope for. The weeks leading up to move-in day were a blur of preparation. They scoured secondhand shops for dorm essentials: a lamp with a slightly bent shade, a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender, a kettle small enough to sit on a windowsill. Lily packed and repacked her bags, while Clara quietly tucked in little extras: a jar of homemade jam, a worn paperback she'd once read aloud to her daughter during power outages. Move-in day dawned clear and warm. The campus was a world away from East Dock, sprawling lawns, brick buildings with ivy climbing. The walls, the air filled with the hum of excited voices. Clara carried a box up to the 4th floor of Lily's dorm, her breath short but her smile wide. They set up the room together, arranging books on the narrow shelves, pinning a photo of the two of them above the desk. When it was done, Clara stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, trying to memorize every detail. "I should get going," she said finally. "Let you settle in." Lily's smile wavered. "I'll call you tonight." Clara nodded, then stepped forward to hug her one more time. "Go make me proud," she whispered. "You already are," Lily said softly. The months that followed were quieter in the apartment. Clara kept busy with work, but the silence in the evenings pressed in. She missed the sound of pages turning at the kitchen table, the soft tap of Lily's pen as she studied. Still, every phone call and every letter from her daughter was a reminder of why she'd endured the years of scraping by. Lily was thriving, joining student groups, acing her classes, even tutoring other students. And then, almost a year later, came the invitation. Commencement ceremony, New Harbor University, guest Clara Moore. The day of the ceremony was bright and clear, the kind of day that felt like a gift. Clara arrived early, taking a seat near the back, her coat neatly pressed, her hands folded in her lap. The stage was decorated with flowers, and a banner stretched across the back read, "Class of the Year, Valedictorian Address." When Lily's name was announced, Clara's chest tightened. Her daughter stepped up to the podium, wearing the black gown and gold sash of the top graduate. "Good afternoon," Lily began, her voice steady. "Today is a day of celebration, not just for us graduates, but for the people who stood behind us, often unseen, always unwavering." She spoke of her professors, her friends, her classmates, and then she paused, looking directly at the back row. "But most of all, I want to thank my mother. She taught me that the measure of a person is not in what they own, but in what they give. She gave everything so I could stand here today. Every late night, every early morning, every sacrifice was for me. And I hope, one day, I can give back even a fraction of what she has given." The applause rose like a wave, but Clara barely heard it over the pounding of her heart. She felt the warmth of tears on her cheeks, and for once, she didn't wipe them away. After the ceremony, Lily found her in the crowd. She was still wearing the gown, the gold sash fluttering in the breeze. "I have something for you," Lily said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small box and placed it in Clara's hands. Inside was a silver pendant in the shape of an anchor. "So you'll always remember," Lily said, "that you were my anchor. You kept me steady when everything else was rough." Clara closed the box, her fingers trembling. "I don't need this to remember," she said, "but I'll treasure it anyway." They stood there for a moment, the noise of celebration swirling around them, holding on to each other like they had on that Tuesday morning when the letter came, as if nothing in the world could break that embrace. Years later, when the applause of graduation ceremonies had faded into the quiet hum of adulthood, Anna often found herself replaying a particular image in her mind. Not the moment she received her diploma, nor the day she walked into her first job interview, but a memory far simpler. It was the sight of her mother, Clara, sitting on the edge of their worn-out sofa, hands still dusted with grime from sorting through cans and bottles, eyes warm but tired. She would look up from mending a torn sleeve and ask, almost shyly, "Did you eat yet?" As if hunger was still the most dangerous enemy they had to face. That image haunted Anna, not because it was sad, but because it was pure. It was the distilled essence of love, stripped of all luxuries, uncorrupted by convenience. Clara never once said she was proud. Words like pride or sacrifice were foreign to her. She simply worked, quietly, persistently, as if the act of providing for her daughter was as natural as breathing. She never demanded gratitude. She didn't even seem to notice the enormity of what she was doing. It took Anna years to understand. True love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, it bends, it bleeds silently in the shadows so that someone else can walk in the light. Anna had been invited to speak at a charity gala, a grand event filled with polished floors, sparkling glasses, and people who had never known the metallic scent of scrap metal in their hands. When it was her turn to take the stage, she carried no notes. She didn't need them. She began softly. "When I was a child, I thought the world was made of two kinds of people, those who had everything and those who had to fight for every little thing. My mother was in the second group, but I was wrong. Some people who seem to have nothing actually have everything that matters. My mother had a heart that could not be bought, a will that could not be broken, and a love that built my entire future." She told them about the nights her mother returned home smelling of rain and rust, about the mornings when breakfast was a single piece of bread split into two, and about the quiet power of someone who refused to let circumstances define her child's destiny. Anna paused, scanning the audience. The room was silent, the kind of silence that only comes when words have reached somewhere beyond the ears. "I stand here today not because I am exceptional," she continued, "but because someone else believed I could be. My mother gave me more than an education. She gave me the courage to face the world without fear of its cruelty. And that is the greatest gift anyone can receive." That night, donations for the charity doubled. But Anna didn't care about the numbers. She cared about the thought that perhaps somewhere out there, another mother who felt invisible might hear this story and realize she was a warrior in her own right. We often measure success by titles, by wealth, by the comfort we've accumulated. But maybe the truest measure is this: did we love someone so fiercely that their life became better because of us? Clara's life was not defined by her struggles, but by her quiet victories, the ones that didn't make headlines, but transformed a single life forever. Anna knew she could never repay her mother in full. Love like that isn't a debt, it's a legacy. And the only way to honor it is to pass it on, to stand in someone else's corner the way Clara once stood in hers. Thank you for listening to today's story. If something in it touched you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply send this video to someone who might need a little gentle light in the middle of life's storms.